I have stood at a great many doors in my life, and I have learned that a door tells you everything if you are patient enough to listen to it. A door that is opened too quickly is hiding something behind it. A door that is left ajar wants you to think it has nothing to hide. And a door that is locked from the inside, in a wing of the palace where no lock should ever turn against the household, is a confession that has not yet found its words. It was the third such door I had found in 11 days, and I was no longer telling myself I was imagining it. My name is Edmund Crale. For 19 years I have served in the Queen's bodyguard at Harrogate Palace, the last 6 of them as a sergeant of the inner watch, which is a polite way of saying that I am the man who stands where the Queen sleeps, where the Queen eats, and where the Queen, on the worst nights of her reign, sits awake with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass of a window and looks out at a kingdom that does not yet know how close it has come to being stolen. I am not a clever man. I want that understood from the start, because clever men tend to be the ones who get caught, and I had no intention of being caught. I am a careful man, which is a different thing entirely. A clever man builds a trap. A careful man simply notices that the floor has been swept too cleanly in a room nobody is supposed to enter, and he keeps noticing, and he does not say a word, and he waits. That morning, the floor of the muniment passage had been swept too cleanly. The muniment passage runs along the spine of the Old West Range, a narrow stone corridor lined on both sides with the iron-strapped cabinets that hold the deeds, the charters, the seals, and the ledgers of the royal house of Harrogate. It smells of beeswax and cold iron, and the particular dust of paper that has been left undisturbed for centuries. Nobody goes there but the archivists, 2 gray old men who move like the documents they guard, and the controller of the household, who holds the keys to every lock in the palace and answers, in theory, to the Queen alone. The controller of the household was Lady Verena Thorne, and Lady Verena Thorne was the cleverest person I had ever met. I had watched her for 6 years from the place where men like me are supposed to be invisible. I had carried her trunks when she arrived as a young widow of impeccable family and slender fortune, summoned to bring order to a household that had grown loose in the late king's last illness. I had watched her bring that order. She was tireless. She remembered every name, every grievance, every debt. She knew which footman's mother was ailing and sent broth. She knew which lady-in-waiting had been passed over for a marriage and arranged, somehow, for the slight to be repaired. Within 2 years there was not a servant in Harrogate who would not have walked into the river for her, and not a courtier who did not owe her some small, soft favor that felt, at the time, like kindness. That is the thing about Lady Thorne that I understood and that the Queen, to her cost, did not understand for a long time. The Queen believed in goodness because the Queen was good, and a good person assumes that order and kindness are the same as virtue. They are not. Order is only a tool. Kindness is only a key. Lady Thorne had been quietly cutting keys for 6 years, and I had been watching her hands while everyone else watched her smile. So when the muniment passage had been swept too clean, and when the 3rd cabinet from the end, the one that held the household accounts and the civil list ledgers, the great dull books that record where the crown's money goes, when that cabinet's lock had been very slightly, very recently scratched around the keyhole by a key that did not quite fit, I did not raise an alarm. I knelt as if to fix my bootstrap, and I looked at the scratches, and I thought, she has had a 2nd key cut, and the 2nd key is not perfect, and she has been coming here at night. Then I stood up, and I straightened my tunic, and I walked my round exactly as I always walked it, and I gave no sign at all. You must understand what I risked by saying nothing. A guard who suspects wrongdoing has a duty to report it. That is the rule, and the rule is a good rule, and I broke it for 11 days, and I would break it again. Because I knew Lady Thorne, and I knew that if I went to the captain of the guard with scratches around a keyhole, the report would pass up the proper channels, and the proper channels ran, every one of them, through the office of the controller of the household. I would be handing my suspicion directly to the only person who could make it disappear, and make me disappear with it, transferred to a frontier post or pensioned off for nerves before the week was out. I had seen her do gentler versions of exactly that to men who became inconvenient. A footman who saw too much was suddenly given a generous severance and a glowing reference to a household 300 miles away. A clerk who asked the wrong question developed, overnight, a reputation for drink. No, if I was going to move against Lady Thorne, I was going to move once, and I was going to move with so much weight behind me that there would be no soft answer she could give. I needed not a suspicion but a wall of facts so high she could not climb over it and so wide she could not walk around it. And I needed to give it not to the proper channels but directly to the one hand that could not be turned, the Queen's own. That was the decision I made on the 11th day, kneeling over a scratched keyhole with my heart going like a drum and my face as still as the stone around me. I would build the wall. I would be patient. I would say nothing, and watch everything, and write nothing down where it could be found and trust no one. And when the day came that Lady Thorne believed she had won on that day, and not one day before, I would open my hand and show her what I had been holding. I did not yet know what she was building toward. I only knew that a woman does not cut a false key to the civil list ledgers in the dead of night, because she is curious about arithmetic. The bell in the clock tower struck 6. The dawn came up gray and ordinary over the forecourt, where in 3 hours the great gates would open, and the first tourists would press their faces to the gilded iron to photograph the changing of the watch, and the kingdom would go about its day believing, as kingdoms do, that the people set above them were exactly what they appeared to be. I went off my night watch, and I did not sleep. I lay on my narrow bed in the guards' quarters with my eyes open, and I went back over 6 years of small things, the favors, the keys, the careful kindnesses, and for the first time I let myself line them up in a row and look at the shape they made. The shape they made was a noose, and the neck it was being fitted to, I was almost certain, belonged to Queen Saralind herself. Let me tell you about the Queen, because everything that follows means nothing unless you understand her, and she is the easiest person in this story to get wrong. Queen Saralind of the royal house of Harrogate came to the throne younger than a monarch should, when her father died and her elder brother died within the same hard winter, and she stood at the great window of the throne room on the night of her accession and wept where she thought no one could see her. I saw her. I was on the door. I have never told a soul, and I am only telling it now because it is the truest thing I know about her. She did not weep for the crown. She wept because she had wanted, very badly, to be an ordinary person, and that door had just closed forever. She married for love, which monarchs are seldom permitted to do, and her husband was Prince Consort Aldrich, a quiet, decent man with ink on his fingers and a habit of forgetting his own importance. They had 2 children. Princess Malin was 8 that year, a small fierce thing who collected beetles in matchboxes and named each one after a member of the household, so that there was a stag beetle called Crale who lived in her windowsill and whom I was, against all my training, rather fond of. Prince Joran was 10, grave and careful, already feeling the weight of a thing he could not yet name. Saralind ruled the way she did everything, which was openly and without armor. She trusted people. She believed that if you treated a person as though they were honorable, they would, more often than not, rise to it. And the terrible thing, the thing I had come to understand on my long nights at her door, is that she was right about almost everyone. The household loved her because she was lovable. The kingdom loved her because she was, visibly and exhaustingly, trying to be good. Almost everyone, not Lady Verena Thorne. Lady Thorne did not hate the Queen. I want to be precise about this, because it would be easier to tell you she did, and it would be a lie. Lady Thorne had simply looked at Queen Saralind for 6 years the way a cold person looks at a warm fire, as a resource that was being wasted by someone who did not understand its value. The Queen, in Lady Thorne's private accounting, was a sentimental woman who held an enormous power loosely, and Lady Thorne was a capable woman who held no power at all and deserved a great deal. To her mind, this was not treason. It was correction. The crown had fallen onto the wrong head, and she meant, with patience and kindness and a great many cut keys, to set the matter right. I knew all this not because she had told me. She had never in 6 years said one improper word, not one. Her discipline was a match for mine, but because I had spent 19 years learning to read what people will not say, and I had begun, in the last year, to be afraid. The fear had a date. It had begun on the night of the late King's memorial, when I had stood at the back of the long gallery and watched Lady Thorne speak quietly to 3 men in turn. They were not men who usually spoke to one another. One was Sir Marston Vale, the Lord Treasurer, a heavy, frightened man whose accounts, it was whispered, did not entirely balance. One was the Earl of Brenwick, who had lost 2 estates to the Queen's land reforms and made jokes about it that were not quite jokes. And one was a foreigner, an envoy of a neighboring crown whose name I did not then know, who watched the room the way I watched the room, which is to say as a professional. 3 men with 3 different griefs against the Queen, and Lady Thorne moving between them like a needle drawing a thread, and a smile on her that was warm as broth. I had not understood it then. I understood it now, kneeling over a scratched keyhole 11 days into my private watch with the dawn coming up gray. She was not gathering allies. She was gathering a story. And a story in a palace is a more dangerous thing than an army, because an army can be met at the gates, and a story walks straight in through the heart. What story? That was the question I could not yet answer, and it was the question that would not let me sleep. I knew the pieces. The false key, the civil list ledgers, the 3 aggrieved men, the foreign envoy. I knew that Lady Thorne never moved until she was certain. And I knew, from the particular brightness that had come into her in the last fortnight, a brightness her smile could not quite contain, the brightness of a person nearing the end of a very long sum, that whatever she was building was nearly built. So I made myself a promise, lying there with the bell tolling 6. I would not sleep until I knew the shape of the thing, and then I would not move until the very moment she believed it finished. There is a kind of patience that looks like cowardice to people who do not understand it. Let them think it. The discipline of the watch is not the discipline of standing still. It is the discipline of choosing, out of 1,000 moments when you could move, the one moment when moving will matter, and spending all the others as still as stone, paying for that one moment with every fiber of your held breath. I rose at noon. I shaved. I put on my dress tunic, because that afternoon there was a council, and the inner watch stands the council door, and I had a feeling, the kind of feeling 19 years gives you, that is not quite a thought, that the council that afternoon was going to matter. I was right. I am sorry to say I am almost always right about the bad ones. The Privy Council of Eldermoor met in the long council chamber on the 1st floor of the State Range, a high room paneled in dark oak with a single long table down its center, and a fire that was lit even in summer because the room never warmed. I took my post at the inner door at 2:30, and I stood where I have stood 1,000 times, hands at my sides, eyes forward, a fixture, a piece of furniture in a red coat, and I watched them come in. The Queen came last, as she always did, in a plain gray gown with the small working circlet she wore for business rather than the great crown. She nodded to me as she passed. She always nodded to me, every single time, 19 years, a small thing that cost her nothing and that I would have died for, and she took her place at the head of the table. Lady Thorne sat at the foot. As Comptroller she had no vote, but she kept the household's books, and so she sat where she could be called upon, and she had a way of sitting at the foot of a table that made you forget there was a head. She had a folder of green leather in front of her. She did not open it. She rested one pale hand upon it, the way you rest a hand on something living to keep it calm. The council moved through its ordinary business, a bridge in the North Counties, a dispute over fishing rights, the wording of a proclamation, And I watched the green folder, and I watched the three men. Sir Marston Vale, the Lord Treasurer, was sweating. He sweated often, but this was a different sweat. He kept touching his collar. The Earl of Brennick lounged with the studied ease of a man who has been told the outcome of a contest in advance, and is enjoying watching the other side not know it. And in the visitor's chair, by special leave of the Queen, sat the foreign envoy from the memorial. I had since learned his name, Count Havard of the Marchlands, a courteous, exact man who represented the crown of a neighboring realm with which Eldermoor shared a long and twitchy border. It was Sir Marston who lit the fuse, and his hands shook as he did it. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was too loud for the room, "before the council rises, I am afraid there is a grave matter I am bound by my office to raise. It concerns the civil list, the household accounts." I felt the temperature of the room change. The Queen set down her pen. "Raise it, Sir Marston," she said. He raised it, and it was, "I will grant Lady Thorne this, a beautiful piece of work, beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, with no mercy in it anywhere." Sir Marston laid out, in a stammering rush, that monies from the civil list, the funds granted by the realm for the running of the crown household, had over the past 3 years been diverted. Large sums. Diverted to private accounts abroad, to land purchases in false names, to interests that touched, he said with his eyes on the table, the crown of the Marchlands itself. He had the figures. He had the dates. He had, he said, copies of the ledger entries in the Queen's own hand of authorization. And the picture those figures painted, when he had finished laying them out one trembling sheet at a time, was this: that Queen Saralind of Eldermoor had for 3 years been quietly selling the interests of her own kingdom to a foreign power, taking the realm's money and the realm's lands, and funneling them across the border. In exchange, the implication hung in the air, unspeakable and therefore unanswerable, for the friendship and the protection of Count Havard's master. It was monstrous. It was the precise opposite of everything the Queen was. And it was, I understood with a cold dropping sensation in my chest, very nearly airtight, because every single document Sir Marston produced was real. The ledgers were real. The signatures were real. The accounts abroad were real. Lady Thorne had not forged a story. She had built one out of true bricks, each one genuine, arranged into a shape that was a perfect and total lie. The Queen had gone very still. I knew that stillness. It was the stillness of a person who has been struck so hard they have not yet felt the pain, only the wrongness of the blow. "These are my ledgers," she said at last quietly. "These are entries from my own household books. Comptroller, these came from your office." Every eye went to the foot of the table. And here Lady Thorne did the most dangerous thing I have ever watched a person do. She did not deny it. She bowed her head and she let her voice tremble, and she said, "Your Majesty, they did. God forgive me, they did, and I have known for 3 months, and I have not slept for the knowing. I came upon them by accident. I prayed I was wrong. I checked, and I could not make myself wrong." She lifted her face, and there were tears in her eyes, real tears. I do not know to this day how she made them, and she said, "I begged Sir Marston to give your Majesty the chance to explain before the council. I could not bear to be the one to—" and she broke off, as though overcome, the loyal servant destroyed by what loyalty had forced her to find. It was perfect. Do you see how perfect it was? She had made herself the heartbroken witness. She had made the Queen the accused, and she had arranged it so that the Queen's first instinct, to point at the office the documents came from, looked like a guilty woman lashing out at the faithful servant who had exposed her. The Earl of Brennick spoke into the silence, smooth as oil. "Your Majesty must see how this appears, to the council, to the realm, to our neighbors." A small bow toward Count Havard. "There must be an inquiry, a full and public one. And until it concludes, forgive me, the realm cannot be seen to be governed by a hand under such a shadow. The honorable course, the only course that protects the crown itself from being dragged through it." He let it hang, then said the word gently, like setting down a knife where everyone could see it, would be for Her Majesty to set aside her powers, temporarily, into the hands of a council of regency until her name is cleared. A council of regency. I did not need to be a clever man to count the chairs at it. Brennick, Vale, the Marchland's good friend, and steering all of them from her place at the foot of the table, the controller of the household, the woman with the keys to every lock in the palace and the books in her green folder and the tears drying on her perfect face. It was an abdication. They were dressing it as a pause and calling it honor and offering it as mercy, but it was an abdication, and once the Queen signed away her powers temporarily to a council that Lady Thorne owned, she would never get them back. The inquiry would find what Lady Thorne wished it to find. The regency would harden into permanence. And Princess Malin and Prince Joran would grow up as the disgraced children of a queen who sold her country, under the guardianship of the very people who had stolen it from her. The Queen looked down the length of the table at the green folder, and then she looked up, and her eyes found me at the door. She did not call on me. She would never have called on me. A guard does not speak in council, and she would not have shamed me by asking. But for 1/2 of 1 second the Queen of Eldermoor looked at the man on her door the way a person looks when the ground has opened and they are reaching without hope for any solid thing. And then she mastered it, and the look was gone, and she turned back to the table with her chin level. "I will consider the council's advice," she said, in a voice that did not shake, "and give my answer tomorrow at noon." Lady Thorne's hand tightened just slightly on the green folder. She had wanted the signature today. Tomorrow was a delay, but she inclined her head graciously. What is one night when you have already won? And the council rose. I stood my post. I let them file out past me. The Earl, the Treasurer, the courteous Count, and last of all Lady Thorne, who paused in the doorway not 2 feet from me and looked, for one moment, directly into my face. I gave her nothing. 19 years of giving nothing, and I gave her the best of it. "Sergeant Crale," she said pleasantly, "a sad day for the house." "My lady," I said, and looked through her at the wall. She studied me a moment longer. Lady Thorne studied everything. It was what made her terrible, and then some calculation behind her eyes filed me away as furniture, as everyone always filed me away, and she swept out. She had one night to enjoy her victory. I had one night to take it from her. And for the first time in 11 days, kneeling that morning over a scratched keyhole feeling like the only sane man in a burning house, I was not afraid anymore. Because she had made one mistake. She had built her whole beautiful machine on true documents, real ledgers, real signatures, real accounts. And a thing built out of true bricks can be taken apart the same way. Every one of those bricks had been carried from somewhere to somewhere, by some hand, on some night, through some door. And I, God help her, am the man who watches the doors. I had until noon the next day. That was 19 hours, and I did not have 19 hours because I could not work in daylight without being seen, and because there were things I needed that were not in the palace at all. I went off council duty at 5, and I did not go to the guards' mess. I went to the one room in Harrogate where I knew, beyond doubt, that Lady Thorne had never been and never would be. The duty room of the night watch, a cramped stone cell off the guardhouse where we keep the post books. You must understand the post books because they are the whole spine of what happened next, and nobody outside the guard ever thinks about them at all. Every door of the inner palace is watched, and every watch is logged. Who is on which door from which hour to which hour, and this is the part that mattered. Every person who passes through an inner door after the household has retired for the night. We write it down. We have written it down for 200 years. Name, door, hour, in and out. It is the dullest writing in the kingdom, and nobody has ever read a word of it, because nobody has ever needed to, because the post books are not kept to catch anyone. They are kept because a thing that is written down is a thing that cannot later be argued about, and the guard, alone among all the offices of the palace, answers to no controller. Our books are ours. Lady Thorne held the keys to every lock in Harrogate. She did not hold the key to that cell, and she had never once thought to ask for it because why would she? It was only the guard's room. It was only furniture. I lit a single lamp, and I took down the postbooks for the last 3 years, and I began to read. I was looking for one thing, and I was looking for it on the nights that matched the dates in Sir Marston's beautiful folder. Each diverted sum, each forged true entry had a date. Each date was the date a document had been signed, or a ledger altered, or an instruction sent. And a document does not alter itself. Someone had gone on each of those nights to the muniment passage where the ledgers were kept, and turned a key in a lock and done their work and gone away again. And whoever it was had passed an inner door to get there. And if they had passed an inner door, then a guard had written it down. It took me 4 hours. My eyes burned and the lamp guttered, and twice I had to stop and press my fists against my closed eyes until the columns of cramped handwriting stopped swimming. But the palace at night is patient, and so am I, and slowly, date by date, the shape came up out of the pages like a body coming up out of dark water. On the night of the first diverted sum, the entry dated the 4th of that long-ago autumn. The postbook of the West Range showed one entry after the household had retired. 11 minutes past 1 in the morning. Through the muniment door. In and out, 40 minutes. The name written in the careful hand of a guardsman named Tobias Finch, who had since left the service. V. Thorne, Comptroller, Household Business. On the night of the 2nd, the same. Past midnight, the muniment door, the Comptroller, Household Business, in the hand of a different guard this time. On the night of the 3rd, and the 4th, and the 9th, and the 14th. Every single date in Sir Marston's folder, every date on which the Queen was supposed to have authorized a betrayal of her own kingdom, matched a night on which Lady Verena Thorne, and not the Queen, had walked alone through the muniment door in the dead small hours, when the Queen herself was asleep behind a door I or a man like me was standing guard upon. I sat back in the hard chair, and I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for 11 days. It was not proof of forgery. A clever advocate, and Lady Thorne would have the cleverest, would say the Comptroller had every right to be in the muniment passage at any hour, that household business is conducted when household business arises, that the postbooks proved only that a diligent servant kept long hours. By itself, the postbook was a brick, a good brick, but one brick is not a wall. I needed the other bricks, and I knew now where they had to be because I knew Lady Thorne, and I knew the one law that governed her absolutely. She trusted no one, and so she kept everything herself, and a person who keeps everything herself must somewhere have a place where the everything is kept. I thought of the 3rd locked door, the one in the old West Range, in a disused suite that had been the apartments of the late King's secretary and stood empty now, sealed, nobody's business. A door that should never be locked from the inside in a wing of the palace where no lock turns against the household. I had found it on the 8th day and noted it and walked on, because on the 8th day I had not yet known what I was looking for. Now I knew. And I had the one thing in all of Harrogate that could open it, the one thing Lady Thorne's keys could not buy and her kindness could not turn. I had a master key to the inner doors that was issued to the sergeant of the watch, kept on the sergeant's own person, logged out of the guard's own armory under the guard's own seal. A key from the one office in the palace she did not control. But I could not use it that night. The West Range at 2 in the morning is walked by the inner watch on the half-hour, and the inner watch that night was a young guardsman named Aldous Reed, 3 years in the service, earnest and good and entirely too honest to be let near a secret. If Reed saw the sergeant of the watch let himself into a sealed suite in the dead of night, Reed would not lie about it, and Reed should not lie about it. And within a day the question of why would climb the proper channel straight back into the green folder. I would have handed Lady Thorne the chance to call me a thief and a spy, and to do it while she still held all the power, and I would have lost everything. No, I needed Reed off that corridor for a clean half-hour, and I needed it without a single soul ever knowing I had wanted it, and I had until noon. I have said I am not a clever man, but 19 years in a place like Harrogate teaches even a careful man a few clever things, and the first of them is this. In a palace, the way to move unseen is not to hide. It is to be exactly where everyone expects the sergeant of the watch to be, doing exactly what they expect him to do, so completely and so visibly that no one looks at you twice. I did not need to sneak. I needed to be ordinary on a night when ordinariness was the rarest thing in the building. So I put the postbooks back exactly as I had found them, and I noted on a scrap of paper, in a private shorthand of my own that no one else could read, and which I would burn before dawn, the 11 dates and the 11 nights, and the names of the guardsmen whose honest hands had, without ever knowing it, written the truth across 3 years of small hours. Then I blew out the lamp, and I went to find young Aldous Reed, and I gave the sergeant of the watch's first and oldest order, the one that has emptied more corridors than any lie ever told. I told him I needed him to run an errand. It was a true errand, which is the only kind worth giving. The armory's powder ledger, I told Reed, was a day overdue at the captain's office across the South Range. A real ledger, really overdue, because I had quietly seen to it that afternoon that it would be, and the captain wanted it on his desk by morning, and a sergeant could not leave the inner range, and would Reed carry it across and wait for the captain's clerk to sign the receipt. It was a 20-minute walk each way, and the clerk was a slow man who would make him wait. Reed, who was earnest and good and glad to be trusted, took the ledger and went, and the West Range corridor was mine. I want to set down here because I have never told it and it sits on me, that I used a good young man's goodness against him that night, and that I would do it again, and that the two of those things being true at once is the whole weight of the work I do. A guard's honor is not a clean thing. It is a thing you carry through dirt because someone has to, and you keep it as clean as you can, and you do not lie to yourself about the dirt. The sealed suite was at the far end of the corridor behind a plain oak door with the late secretary's faded name card still in its little brass frame. I stood before it with my master key in my gloved hand, and I listened. The palace at 2:30 has a sound, a great breathing silence, and I have stood inside that silence so many nights that I can hear a single wrong note in it from 50 feet. There was no wrong note. Reed was gone, the corridor was empty, the household slept. I turned the key. The lock was new. That was the first thing my hand told me before my eyes could confirm it. The old wards had been replaced, recently and well, with a fine modern lock that my master key was not cut for, and for one cold second I thought I was beaten at the threshold. But she had been too clever for her own safety. A new lock in a sealed door is a confession by itself, and more than that, the people she had hired to fit it had fitted it well but had not been able to do anything about the door itself, which was 200 years old and hung on 200-year-old hinges set into a frame that had swelled and shrunk through 200 winters. The lock held. The frame did not. I pressed my shoulder to the door above the lock, where the old wood had pulled away from the jamb by the width of a finger, and I worked it patiently, the way you work everything in this trade, and the swollen frame gave up its grip with a sound no louder than a sigh, and I was in. I closed the door behind me, and I lit my shuttered lamp, and I looked at the room where Lady Verena Thorne kept her everything. It was very tidy. Of course it was. There was a writing table and a locked iron strongbox of the kind the Treasury uses, and a tall cabinet, and on the writing table, neatly squared, a leather portfolio. I went to the portfolio first because it was the thing left out, and the thing left out is the thing in use, and the thing in use is the thing that matters. Inside the portfolio was the rest of the wall. I will not pretend I understood all of it that night, crouched over a shuttered lamp with one ear on the corridor, and my heart counting Reed's footsteps in my chest. But I understood enough, and I understood the shape, and the shape was a complete confession written in the patient, beautiful hand of a woman who had never once imagined that anyone would read it. There were drafts. That was the thing that undid her in the end, the drafts. A forger who is wise burns her drafts, but Lady Thorne was not a forger by trade. She was a controller, an administrator, a woman whose whole life was the keeping of records, and she could no more burn a working paper than she could stop breathing. So she had kept them. Sheet after sheet of practice, the Queen's signature, traced and traced and traced again, a dozen attempts down a single page, each one closer than the last. The loops and the long descender of the royal name learned the way a child learns a letter. There was a sheet where she had practiced the Queen's particular way of writing the word authorized, over and over, the very word that stood at the head of every false ledger entry. There was correspondence. Letters in her own hand, never sent, drafts again, letters to the Earl of Brennick that spoke with terrible plainness of our arrangement, and the Regency as discussed, and your lands restored with interest the moment the matter is concluded. A letter to Sir Marston Vale that was, when you read it closely, not a request but a threat. It reminded him, in the gentlest words imaginable, of certain shortfalls in the Treasury's own accounts that need never trouble anyone provided Sir Marston did his duty by the realm when the time came. She had not bought the Lord Treasurer. She had caught him, the way she caught everyone, and was holding his own crimes over him to make him the instrument of hers. And there was the thing that turned my stomach, the keystone of it all, a single sheet that laid out in her own neat columns the true destination of every diverted sum, not to the Marchlands at all, not to any foreign crown, but to accounts she herself controlled, screened behind false names and false purposes, the very accounts she had then dressed up to look like the Queen's treason. She had stolen the realm's money with her own hand, through a key she had cut herself, and she had laid every coin of it at the Queen's door. The story she had told the council that afternoon was not merely a lie about the Queen. It was a perfect inversion of the truth. Every crime she accused the Queen of, she had herself committed. She had simply turned the mirror around. I knelt there in the dark, and I felt something I am not proud of, which was not triumph but a kind of grief, because I had served in this house for 19 years, and I had carried this woman's trunks when she came to it young and widowed, and I had watched her be kind to footmen's mothers, and some part of me had wanted, even now, even kneeling in the proof of it, to be wrong. I was not wrong. I am almost always right about the bad ones. I did not take the papers. That was the hardest discipline of the whole night, and it was the most important, and if you remember one thing about the work, I do let it be this. A thief in the night who steals the evidence is a thief, and his evidence is poisoned the moment it leaves the room, because she would wake to a rifled portfolio and a sprung lock, and she would know. And a woman like Lady Thorne with 12 hours warning is more dangerous than any army. She would burn what was left, deny what was gone, and turn the theft itself into one more weapon, the loyal controller, robbed in the night by some agent of the desperate, guilty Queen. No. The papers had to stay exactly where they were, untouched, so that they could be found in daylight in the open, by an authority she could not turn, with witnesses she could not buy. So I did the only thing I could do, which was the thing I am good at. I remembered. I went through every sheet in that portfolio, and I read it, and I set it back precisely as it had lain, square to the edge, in order. And I built the room into my memory the way I build a watch into my memory, the strong box, the cabinet, the table, the portfolio, the practice signatures, the letters, the keystone sheet, so that I could later swear to a court not that I had a paper, but that I had seen with my own eyes in that room behind that new lock, the proof. And I noted the one thing I could safely carry, which was not a paper at all. I scored a small, deliberate, invisible mark into the soft wax of the new lock's keyway with the tip of my own key, a mark I would know again, so that I could prove the lock had not been changed between this night and the moment it was opened before witnesses. Then I worked the old frame shut behind me, and I turned the dead lock that I could not truly lock, and I made the door look exactly as I had found it, name card and all. And I had been in the room perhaps 11 minutes, and Aldous Reed's footsteps were not yet on the south stair, and the corridor was empty, and I walked back to my post with my hands at my sides and my eyes forward, and the whole confession of Lady Verena Thorne carried out of that sealed room in the only strongbox in Harrogate she could not open, which was the inside of my head. I had my wall now. The post books, the 11 nights, the practice signatures, the letters, the keystone sheet, the marked lock, bricks enough and to spare. What I did not have, and what I lay awake the rest of that short night turning over and over, was a way to use them. Because a wall of evidence is worth exactly nothing if you cannot lay it before the one hand that cannot be turned, in the one moment when it cannot be argued away, in front of the people whose seeing it will make it true. I knew what I had. I did not yet know how to put it in the Queen's hand, without it passing first through the proper channels. And every proper channel in Harrogate ran through the green folder at the foot of the council table. Reed came up the south stair at last with the captain's signed receipt, pleased with himself, and reported the errand done, and I thanked him gravely and sent him back to his round, and I stood my post until the bell struck 4, and I thought, and I thought, and I thought. The answer, when it came, did not come from cleverness. It came from a small, fierce girl and a stag beetle in a matchbox named after me. It was a little after dawn, and I had come off the night watch and not yet gone to my bed, and I was standing in the small east garden where the inner watch is permitted to take the air, when Princess Malin found me. She was supposed to be at her lessons. She was very often not where she was supposed to be, which was one of the many things I loved about her and would have died to protect. "Crale," she said, marching up to me with the seriousness of the very young, "Crale is sick. The beetle. He won't come out of his box and his legs don't move right." I knelt down, a sergeant of the watch on one knee in the dew at 6 in the morning for a beetle, and I looked into the matchbox she held out, and the stag beetle named after me lay on its back in a curl of cotton wool, slow but, I judged, not yet beyond hope. "He's cold, Your Highness," I said. "Beetles go slow when they're cold. Put him where the sun comes through the window and don't wake him with poking and he'll likely come round by midday." She considered this with enormous gravity. And then, because children say the true thing while the rest of us are still arranging the careful one, she said, "Mama's cold too. She was crying last night. She thinks I didn't hear but I heard. Joran heard as well. There's a lady who wants to take her crown and we're not supposed to know but everyone knows. I have stood through threats and through curses, and through a man drawing a blade 3 feet from my face, and I have not moved. I nearly came apart at a beetle and an 8-year-old in a garden at dawn." "Your Highness," I said carefully, "your mother is the bravest person in this palace, braver than any guard, and there are people in this house who would do anything to keep her safe. Anything at all. Are you one of them?" "I am the first of them," I said, and it was the truest oath I have ever sworn, and I swore it on one knee to a child over a dying beetle, which is, I have come to think, exactly where the realest oaths get sworn. And then the thing happened that I have called, ever since, the answer, and it happened because Malin trusted me, and because she was a child, and so the world had not yet taught her to route everything through the proper channels. "Will you tell her?" she said. "Will you tell Mama she's brave? She'd believe it from you. She says you're the only one who never wants anything. She says you're the only one who never wants anything." I have turned that sentence over more times than I can count. The Queen had said it of me, to her daughter in the privacy of the nursery. That of all the souls in Harrogate, the sergeant on her door was the one who had never, in 19 years, asked her for a single thing. No favor, no preferment, no soft word dropped in the right ear. And because I had never wanted anything, I was the one person in the palace whose loyalty could not be bought, leveraged, or doubted. And the one person, therefore, that Lady Thorne, who understood everyone through what they wanted, had never been able to read it all. She had filed me as furniture precisely because I wanted nothing, and a thing that wants nothing is, to a mind like hers, not a person but a fixture. She had never feared me. It had never once occurred to her to fear me. And there, kneeling in the wet grass, I understood at last how to put the wall in the Queen's hand. I could not reach the Queen through any office, because every office ran through the Comptroller. But I did not need an office. I was the inner watch. I stood by the oldest right of my service at the door of the Queen's private apartments, and no Comptroller's writ governed what passed between a sworn guard and the sovereign he guarded across that threshold. It was the one channel in Harrogate that Lady Thorne did not own, because it was not a channel at all. It was simply the ancient, naked fact of a guard and his queen and a door. She had spent 6 years cutting keys to every lock in the palace, and she had never thought to cut a key to that, because there is no key to that. There is only a man's oath, and either you trust it or you do not, and the Queen trusted mine. But I could not go to her that morning. The household was waking. Ladies-in-waiting would be about her, and any of them, all unknowing, might mention to the Comptroller that the sergeant of the watch had asked private words of the Queen, and the Comptroller would wonder why. And a woman like Lady Thorne does not need much to wonder before she acts. And the council's answer was due at noon. Whatever I did, I had to do it after the household had retired and before noon struck, a window of a few dark hours on the very night before her ruin, when the Queen would be alone behind her door with me on the other side of it, and Lady Thorne would be home in her own apartment savoring the last night of her long sum, certain that nothing now could be changed. So I told Malin that I would tell her mother she was brave, and that she should keep Crale warm and not poke him, and I sent her into her lessons. And I went to my bed at last, and I slept 4 hours like a stone, the first sleep I had taken in 12 days, because for the first time I knew not only what I had but how to use it. I woke at noon, the noon before the noon, you understand, a full day before the council's answer, and I made my preparations through the long ordinary afternoon, doing every dull thing the sergeant of the watch does, visible and unremarkable, drawing not one eye. And as the afternoon wore on, the palace around me began slowly to lean toward the green folder, the way a field of grass leans before a storm. For Lady Thorne had not been idle either. She never was. While I slept she had been at her quiet work, and by the time I woke the shape of tomorrow had hardened in a way that turned my blood cold, because she had done the one thing I had not allowed for. She had moved the noon. Word came down through the household in the careful way that important word travels in a palace, half rumor and half instruction, that the council would reconvene tomorrow not in the closed long council chamber but in the great hall, and that it would be open to the assembled court, open to the heralds who carried news to the realm, open, above all, to Count Havard of the Marchlands, who would stand witness as the representative of a neighboring crown, so that when Queen Saralind set aside her powers it would be done in the full sight of the world, beyond any later unsaying, a public abdication dressed as a public clearing of the air. I understood, with a sick lurch, exactly what she had done and why. A closed council can change its mind in private. A private signature can be reconsidered behind a private door, but a thing done in the great hall, in front of the court and the heralds and a foreign crown, becomes history the instant it happens, and history cannot be argued with. By moving the matter into the open, Lady Thorne had armored it. She had made it so that even if the Queen found her courage overnight, even if some friend rallied to her, the sheer public weight of the occasion would crush any defense. To stand in that hall before the assembled court and refuse to set aside her powers, with the documents of her apparent treason laid out on the table and a foreign witness watching, would not look like innocence. It would look like a guilty woman clinging to a throne she had forfeited. Lady Thorne had built a room in which the truth itself would sound like a lie. And she had done one thing more, the cruelest and the cleverest thing of all, and I learned it from a frightened understeward who told me without understanding what he was telling me. The children were to attend. Princess Malin and Prince Joran were to stand in the great hall and watch their mother set aside her crown, for the look of the thing, Lady Thorne had said, so the realm could see the succession honored and the young royals present at a solemn and necessary moment. It was monstrous. She meant to break the queen in front of her own children, and to use the children's presence as one more chain, because a mother humiliated before her son and daughter does not fight. A mother whose first thought is to spare her children a scene will sign anything, quietly, to make the scene end. The storm I had felt coming was no longer coming. It was here, and it had moved up a day, and it had moved into the open, and it had reached out one pale hand and laid it on the children. I stood at my afternoon post with my face like stone, and I felt the whole thing tilt. Because everything I had built, the careful plan to put the wall in the queen's private hand, in the quiet dark, across the threshold of her own door, depended on time and on privacy, and Lady Thorne had just taken both away. There would be no quiet midnight word now. The queen would be surrounded until the moment she walked into that hall. And once she was in the hall in the open, before the court and the heralds and the foreign crown, I would be exactly what I had always been to Lady Thorne, the very thing that let me hide in plain sight and the very thing that now seemed to doom me. Furniture. A guard at the door. A man with no standing to speak, no office to invoke, no right under any protocol of the realm to open his mouth in the great hall of Harrowgate while the Privy Council sat. I had built a wall high enough to save the queen, and the woman I had built it against had just locked it in a room I could not, by every rule and right of my service, enter. That was the false dawn turned inside out, not a moment when it looked one, a moment when it looked, after all my careful nights, completely and finally lost. I went to my bed that night and I did not sleep, and somewhere past 2 in the morning, staring at the dark stone of the ceiling, I understood that the only way left to save the queen was to break the oldest rule of the only thing I had ever been. A guard does not speak. That is not a regulation. It is older than the regulations. It is the marrow of the thing. The guard stands and the guard watches and the guard does not speak, because the moment a guard begins to give his opinion he is no longer a guard. He is a courtier with a rifle, and a man like that is worth nothing to anyone. My whole life, my whole worth, the entire reason the queen could say of me that I was the only one who never wanted anything, rested on the fact that I had stood at her door for 19 years and never once made myself a part of the story. To save her, I was going to have to walk into the great hall in front of the assembled court and the heralds and a foreign crown, and become the story. I was going to have to speak. And in the instant I did it, I would stop being the thing she trusted, the silent, wanting nothing fixture, and become a guardsman with a grievance, exactly the kind of man Lady Thorne could explain away in a single sentence. A disgruntled servant, a man put up to it, a liar. She would have 100 ways to turn it, and I would have given her the opening by the simple act of opening my mouth. So if I was going to break the oldest rule, I could only break it once, and it had to land with such weight and be backed by such proof, and be done in front of such witnesses, that no sentence of hers could turn it. I could not walk in alone. I needed the wall to be seen, not just told. I needed the sealed suite opened in daylight before eyes that could not be bought. And I needed one thing more, the thing that had eluded me from the start, an authority in that hall that Lady Thorne did not own. I lay there and I went through them, every great office of the realm, and one by one I crossed them off, because she had spent 6 years making sure that every one of them owed her something soft or feared her something hard. The Lord Treasurer was hers by his own crimes. The Earl was hers by his greed. The household was hers by love. The council was leaning her way by the sheer momentum of the trap, and the captain of the guard. I sat up in the dark. The captain of the guard. Colonel Holly's Garin, who commanded the whole bodyguard and answered, like me, to the Queen alone and to no controller, whose office, like our post books, stood outside the household entirely. An old soldier of the plain, blunt, unbribable sort, a man who had been passed over for half the soft preferments of court precisely because he had never learned to want them, and who, for exactly that reason, Lady Thorne had filed away, just as she had filed me, as a tool too dull to fear. I had served under Garin for 11 years. I knew his honesty the way I knew my own hands. And I knew that the one office in Harrogate with the standing to march into the Great Hall, the right to be heard before the council, and the men to enforce what was found, was the office of the captain of the guard, and that its key had never been cut for the green folder, because it could not be. But I could not simply go to him with a story. Garin was honest, which meant he was also exact, and an exact man does not act on a sergeant's say-so against the controller of the household on the morning of a council. If I went to him with words, he would do the right and proper thing, which was to take it up the chain. And the chain, the moment it left his office, ran into the household, and the household ran into the green folder, and the warning would reach Lady Thorne before noon, and she would burn the portfolio and deny the lock and turn the whole thing, the theft, the accusation, the disgruntled sergeant and the credulous old colonel, into one more proof of how desperate the guilty Queen's friends had become. No, I could not give Garin words. I had to give him the room. I had to take the one honest authority left in the palace and walk him to that sealed door and let him open it himself, with his own hand in the cold light of morning, so that what he found there he found as a witness and not as a man told a tale. The proof had to make him, not the other way around. And that at last was the plan, whole and entire, and it had two halves and a single razor's edge of timing between them. The first half, at first light before the household stirred and long before the court gathered, I would go to Colonel Garin, not with a story, but with a single request that a sergeant of the watch has every right to make, and that would cost me nothing if I was wrong. That he come with me now at once to inspect an irregularity in the sealed west suite, a security matter, a door that should not be locked and was. An honest colonel cannot refuse to inspect a security irregularity reported by his own sergeant of the watch. He would come. He would see the new lock on the sealed door, already wrong, already a question. And then I would open it before him with my own master key past the swollen frame, and let the room speak for itself. The practiced signatures, the letters, the keystone sheet, the whole confession lying square and neat on the writing table exactly as Lady Thorne had left it. Garin would not need me to explain it. Garin had read enough false accounts in his life to know a true one when it lay open in front of him. The room would make the witness, and the witness would have the standing and the men. The second half, the timing. We could not move the moment we had it, because to seize Lady Thorne at dawn would be to seize her on a sergeant's irregularity, before the council in the dark, where her allies could still cry foul, and the matter could still be mudded into a private quarrel. No, she had chosen the great hall. She had chosen the open. She had chosen to make her victory a public thing beyond any unsaying, and so I would let her have her public thing and turn it on her, and make her ruin as public and as beyond unsaying as she had meant the Queen's to be. We would let the council convene. We would let her stand at the foot of the table with her green folder and her tears ready and the children watching, and we would let her come within one sentence, one signature, of everything she had spent 6 years building. And then, at the very top of her sum, in front of the court and the heralds and Count Havard of the Marchlands, the captain of the guard would step forward with what he had seen with his own eyes, and the wall would come down on her where the whole world could watch it fall. It was a terrible risk. If anything slipped, if Garin would not come, if the room had been moved, if the timing broke by a minute, the Queen would lose her crown and I would lose my place and Lady Thorne would win, completely and forever. I knew all that. I lay in the dark and I weighed it the way you weigh everything in this trade, which is to say I weighed it once, fully, and then I stopped weighing it. Because a man who keeps weighing his decision past the point of decision is only looking for permission to do nothing. I had decided. I rose before the bell struck 5 and I shaved, and I put on my dress tunic and I went to wake the captain of the guard. The corridors of Harrogate before dawn are the loneliest in the kingdom. I walked them with my measured step and my steady face, a sergeant about ordinary business, and inside I was a man carrying the whole weight of a crown in his memory and praying. I, who pray as seldom as any soldier, that an old colonel's honesty would prove as unbendable as I had staked everything that it was. Colonel Garin was already awake. Old soldiers wake before the bell. The habit outlives the war. He opened his own door in his shirt sleeves with his gray hair on end and his eyes immediately, completely alert, and he looked at the sergeant of the watch standing in his doorway at 5 in the morning in dress uniform, and he did not ask a foolish question. He asked the right one. "How bad?" he said. And I knew, in that single word, that I had chosen the one right man in the palace. "Bad enough that I have come to you and not up the chain, sir," I said. "Bad enough that I will answer for going outside the channels gladly after if I am wrong. There is a security irregularity in the sealed west suite. A door that should not be locked is locked with a new lock fitted in secret. I request that you inspect it with me, now, before the household wakes." It was a clean request and a true one, and it gave him nothing to disbelieve. He looked at me a moment longer. Garin studied things too, but where Lady Thorne studied people for their wants, Garin studied them for their soundness, and I felt him test the soundness of me and find it holding, and then he reached for his coat. "You've never wasted my time in 11 years, Crale," he said. "I'll not start assuming you've begun today." We went through the waking palace together, the captain and his sergeant on a security round, the most ordinary sight in Harrogate, and not one soul looked at us twice. The east windows were going gray to pearl as we came into the west range. The sealed suite stood at the end of the corridor with the late secretary's faded name card in its little brass frame, exactly as I had left it. "There," I said, and I let him go to it first, and I said nothing more, because the room had to make the witness. Garin saw the new lock at once. An old soldier's eye for the wrong detail is the same eye a guard has. He ran his thumb over the bright modern wards set into the 200-year-old door, and his face changed. "This is new," he said. "On a sealed suite. Who fitted this?" "That is one of the questions, sir," I said. "May I?" He stood back, and I took out my master key, the sergeant's key, logged from the guard's own armory under the guard's own seal, a key from the one office she did not control, and I showed him, before I used it, the small invisible mark I had scored into the wax of the keyway 2 nights before, and I told him plainly what it was and why, so that he would know the lock had not been touched between that night and this morning, so that no advocate could ever say the room had been salted in the dark. He understood instantly. He was nodding before I finished, and then I worked the swollen frame as I had worked it before, and the old wood gave its sigh, and the door of the room where Lady Verena Thorne kept her everything swung open into the gray dawn light, and Colonel Holly's Garin stepped inside and stopped. I did not point. I did not narrate. I stood in the doorway with my hands at my sides, and I let him cross to the writing table on his own, and pick up the portfolio on his own, and open it on his own, and read. I have watched a great many faces in my life. I have never watched one travel the road that Garin's face traveled in the next 4 minutes, from a soldier's wary patience to disbelief, to a cold, towering, controlled fury that frightened me more than any shouting could have, because it was the fury of an honest man who has just understood exactly how close his queen has come to being destroyed by a lie built of true things, in his own palace, under his own watch, while he stood his post and saw nothing. He read the practice signatures. He read the letters, the Earl, the Treasurer, the Regency as discussed, your lands restored with interest. He read the keystone sheet, the true ledger, the real destinations of every coin she had laid at the Queen's door. He set the last page down with the exaggerated care of a man who does not trust his hands, and he stood very straight, and he said, in a voice gone quiet and terrible, "She means to do it today, in the great hall, in the open." "Yes, sir." "With the children watching." "Yes, sir." For one moment the old colonel closed his eyes. Then he opened them, and he was wholly himself again, the soundest man in Harrowgate, and he began, fast and low, to do exactly what I had come to him to have done, to take the matter up into an authority that Lady Thorne could not turn. "We take nothing," he said, and I could have wept with relief, because it was the very discipline I had held to alone for 12 days, and here was the captain of the guard reaching it in one breath. "Nothing leaves this room. It is found in daylight before witnesses, with the lock and your mark and the both of us to swear to it. We seal the corridor, 2 of my own men I will choose by name in the next 10 minutes, men with no debt to the household, posted on this door from now until the council, and the household told only that there is a security matter in the West Range, which is the truth and tells them nothing." He was already moving for the door. "You and I do not speak of this to a living soul between here and noon, not to the Queen." "Sir," I said, and it stopped him, because a sergeant does not interrupt a colonel, and I had just done it, and we both knew it meant the next words mattered. "The Queen, she has spent a night believing she is alone. She walks into that hall in a few hours to face her ruin in front of her children with no friend that she knows of in the world. I have stood at her door for 19 years. I am asking your leave, sir, before she goes into that hall, to do the one thing I have never done in all that time. To speak to her, to tell her she is not alone. Not the proof, I will give her no detail she could be made to seem to have known, nothing that could be turned against her. Only that she is not alone, and that she must hold, and that she must, whatever is said and whatever is offered, sign nothing and set nothing aside and trust her guard." Garin looked at me for a long moment in the gray light of that terrible little room. He was weighing it the way I had weighed everything, and he weighed it once, and then he stopped. 19 years on her door," he said, "and never asked her for a thing." "No, sir." "Then she'll believe you." He nodded once, a soldier's nod that is worth more than any signature. "Tell her she is not alone. Tell her to hold and to sign nothing whatever they offer. Tell her the guard knows the truth, and the truth will stand in that hall before noon. And tell her nothing else, for her own protection, nothing else. Can you do that and give her not one detail she could be made to seem to have known?" "I have stood silent for 19 years, sir," I said. "I can be careful with what I say." Something that was almost, despite everything, a grim smile touched the corner of the old colonel's mouth. "Aye," he said, "I expect you can. Go. I have men to place in a hall to think about. Be at the door of the great hall before the court gathers in your dress and your full kit, and when I send for you, and I will send for you, sergeant, at the top of her sum, and not one moment before you come, and you bring this room with you in that head of yours, and you tell it plain. No grievance, no flourish. Plain, a guard reporting what he saw. Do you understand me?" "Plain, sir." "As a guard reporting what he saw." "Then we have until noon," said Colonel Hollis Garin, "to take the kingdom of Eldermoor back from a woman who very nearly stole it with a pen." And he went to place his men, and I went, with my heart steady at last, to keep the only appointment that had ever frightened me, to break my silence, for the first time in 19 years, at the door of my Queen. I caught her in the half-hour before her women came to dress her for the hall, in the small private oratory off her apartments where she went. I had long known, to be alone before the hardest things. I asked the lady at the outer door for a word with Her Majesty on a matter of the watch, which was true, and roused no question, the sergeant of the watch reporting on a security matter being the dullest event a palace morning can hold, and I went in, and I closed the door, and for the first time in 19 years I stood in a room alone with my Queen. She was sitting very straight on the little bench before the cold altar, dressed in the plain dark gown she had chosen to be ruined in, and she had clearly not slept. And when she saw it was me, a kind of bewilderment crossed her exhausted face, because the sergeant of the watch had never once in 19 years sought her out, and she could not imagine why he would now, on this of all mornings. "Sergeant Crale," she said, "is something wrong with the watch?" "No, Your Majesty," I said, "something is right with it." And then I broke the oldest rule, and I spoke. Your Majesty, I said, I have stood at your door for 19 years and I have never asked you for a thing, and I am not asking you for one now. I am telling you something and then I will go back to being silent and I will never speak out of my place again. You are not alone. You have never been less alone than you are this morning. The guard knows the truth, the whole truth, Your Majesty, found and witnessed and held safe, and the truth will stand in that hall before noon, in front of them all. I cannot tell you more than that, and I beg you not to ask me, because what you do not know this morning is what will keep you safe this morning. But I can tell you this, and you may stake your crown on it, because I have. I looked at her then full in the face, which a guard does not do, and I gave her the last of it. Whatever they say in that hall, whatever they offer you, however gentle, however reasonable, however much it seems the only way to spare your children a scene, sign nothing. Set nothing aside. Hold, Your Majesty, just hold, and trust your guard. The Queen of Eldermoor looked at me, and I watched the thing happen in her that I had hoped for and not dared to expect. I watched a person who has spent a sleepless night utterly alone discover, in a single moment, that she is not. The exhaustion did not leave her face. But something came up underneath it, something I had seen only once before, on the night of her accession at the window. The steel that was always in her, that her goodness hid from people who mistook kindness for weakness. Malin said you would tell me I was brave, she said softly. She said I'd believe it from you because you're the only one who never wants anything. You are the bravest person in this palace, Your Majesty, I said, and it is true, I have never wanted anything. I paused. I want one thing now. Name it. That you walk into that hall, I said, like a queen who has already won, because you have. They only do not know it yet. She rose from the bench. She was a small woman and she made herself tall. Thank you, Sergeant Crale, said Queen Saralind, and her voice did not shake at all. Go to your post, I will hold. I bowed and I went out and I took my place in the procession to the great hall as the sergeant of the watch furniture, a man in a red coat, a fixture nobody looked at twice, and inside me the whole weight had lifted and turned to a terrible steadiness, because the hard part was done. The Queen would hold. Garin had his men and his plan. The room was sealed and witnessed. All that remained was to let Lady Verena Thorne climb, in front of the whole world, to the very top of her 6-year sum, and to be standing there when she reached it. The great hall of Harrogate is the largest room in the kingdom, a vast vault of stone and banners with the high seat at one end beneath the arms of the house of Harrogate, and that morning it was full. The court had assembled in its ranks, the lords and ladies and officers of the realm. The heralds stood ready by the doors with the cased proclamations that would carry whatever happened here out to every corner of Eldermoor by nightfall. And in a place of honor near the high seat stood Count Havard of the Marchlands, courteous and exact, the foreign witness whose presence would make the morning's work a fact between crowns. The Privy Council sat at a long table set below the high seat. And at the foot of that table, in a gown of grave and beautiful dark blue, with her green leather folder squared before her and her hands folded upon it, and an expression of profound and sorrowing duty arranged upon her perfect face, sat Lady Verena Thorne. The children were there. That was the cruelty of it, and the sight of it nearly broke my steadiness. Princess Malin and Prince Joran had been placed on 2 small chairs to one side, dressed in their best, grave and frightened, and trying so hard to be good, 2 children brought to watch their mother undone and made, by their mere presence, into the chain that would bind her. Malin's eyes found me at my post by the great doors. I gave her the smallest thing, not a smile. A guard does not smile on duty, but a single slow blink, a thing we had between us, the thing that meant all is well, be brave. Her small chin came up. Beside her, Joran sat with the terrible composure of a boy who has decided he must be a man today, and my heart went out to him, and I thought, not today, lad. You will not have to be a man today. Today the men have got it. Then the doors opened, and the Queen came in. She came in exactly as I had asked her to, and I will carry the sight of it to my grave. She did not come in like a woman to her ruin. She came in like a queen who had already won, and was merely waiting for the rest of the room to learn it. She walked the length of that vast hall with her chin level and her step unhurried, past the ranked court, past the foreign count, past the council table, and she did not so much as glance at the green folder. And she took her place beneath the arms of her house, and she sat, and she looked down the hall at the people who had come to take her crown with an expression of perfect, patient calm. I saw the flicker of it cross Lady Thorne's face, the first flicker I had seen there in 6 years. She had expected a broken woman. She had built her whole mourning around a broken woman, a mother who would sign quietly to spare her children a scene. And the woman who had walked into the hall was not broken at all. For 1/2 of 1 second, the cleverest person I had ever met did not understand what she was looking at, and a thread of something that was almost unease moved behind her eyes. Then she smoothed it away and folded her hands more firmly on her folder and reached, as a clever person does when a variable surprises her, for the certainty of her plan. She still held every card. A queen's calm courage cannot answer ledgers and signatures. Let her be brave. Brave women sign too. The Earl of Brennick rose to open the proceedings, smooth and grave, and began to lay the mourning out for the assembled court. The painful necessity, the grave matter, the documents, the honorable course. And I stood at the great doors with my hands at my sides and my face like stone, and the whole confession of Lady Verena Thorne held safe behind my eyes. And I waited for Colonel Garen's signal, and I let her climb. It was a long climb and a terrible one to stand through. The Earl laid it all out for the court with a craftsman's care, the diverted moneys, the foreign accounts, the lands in false names, the implication of betrayal to a neighboring crown, each charge fitted to the next. Then Sir Marston Vale was called, sweating, to confirm the documents, and he confirmed them in his too loud voice with his eyes on the table. The ledgers were produced. The signatures were shown. The court murmured, that low dreadful sound a crowd makes when it is being turned, and I watched faces I had known for years look at their queen with the beginning of doubt, and it took everything I had to stand still through it, because the truth was in my head and not yet in the room, and a truth not yet spoken is the loneliest thing in the world. The queen said almost nothing. When the Earl asked with grave courtesy whether Her Majesty wished to respond to the documents, she said only, in a clear, calm voice that carried to the back of the hall, "I have authorized no such thing. These are not my acts. I will answer them fully, but I will answer them in their proper time, and I will set aside nothing and sign nothing before this hall today." And she folded her hands and waited. It was exactly right. It was what I had begged her to do, and it cost her, I knew, more than the court could ever guess, to sit calm and brief under the weight of a lie that made her a traitor to her own people, in front of her own children, and not break, and not protest, and simply hold. The court did not know what they were watching. I did. I was watching the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do, which was to do almost nothing, on purpose, on trust, at the very edge of ruin. And then Lady Verena Thorne rose, and the room went still for her, and she made her play. She made it beautifully. She did not gloat, she would never gloat. Gloating is for lesser schemers, she sorrowed. She stood at the foot of the table with her green folder in her hands, and she addressed the court as the household's most faithful servant brought to the most painful duty of her life. She spoke of her years of devotion. She spoke of her horror at what she had been forced to find. She let her voice break in exactly the right place. And then she turned to the high seat, and she made the offer that was the whole point of the morning, and she made it as a mercy. "Your Majesty," she said, and the tears stood in her eyes, real tears. "I will never know how she did it. No one in this hall doubts your courage. But courage cannot answer these papers, and the realm cannot be governed under their shadow, and the longer this matter hangs, the more it wounds the crown itself, the crown your children will one day wear." A glance, exquisitely judged, toward the 2 small chairs. "I beg you, for the sake of the house, for the sake of the children, set aside your powers, only for a time, only until your name is cleared. Let a council of regency hold the realm steady while the truth is found, and spare yourself, and spare them, the children again, the long agony of an open trial. It is the honorable course. It is the only loving course. Sign the instrument of regency, here, now, before the court, and let the healing begin." And she lifted from the green folder a single document, and she carried it the length of the table herself, and she laid it before the high seat with a pen beside it, and she stepped back with her head bowed, the faithful servant who had done a dreadful duty out of love, and the whole hall held its breath. It was the top of her sum. Everything she had built in 6 years had come to this single sheet of paper and this single pen, in front of the court and the heralds and the foreign crown, with the children watching, with the queen alone at the high seat above a document that would end her reign forever the moment her name touched it. There was nothing left for her to do but watch the queen sign. She had won. She knew she had won. The flicker of unease was long gone. She stood with her head bowed and her hands folded, and behind the sorrow on her face was the deep, banked certainty of a woman at the summit of her life's work. I looked across the great hall to the small side door behind the council table, where Colonel Holly's Garin stood in his full dress, and his decorations with 2 of his men behind him, men with no debt to the household, and he met my eye, and he gave the signal. I stepped forward. I want you to understand what those 2 words cost and what they meant, because 19 years went into them. For 19 years I had been furniture. For 19 years I had stood at doors and not spoken and not moved and not been a part of any story, and the whole of my worth had rested on that stillness. And now I broke it, not in a panic, not in a temper, but as the last and most deliberate act of the very discipline that had held me still, because the discipline of the watch was never the stillness. It was choosing the one moment out of 1,000 when moving would matter, and spending all the others as stone, paying for the one with all the rest. This was the one moment. I had paid for it with 12 sleepless nights and 19 silent years. I stepped forward from the great doors into the body of the hall, in my dress tunic and my full kit, the sergeant of the watch walking up the center of the great hall of Harrogate while the whole court turned to stare, and I stopped a respectful distance from the high seat, and I came to attention, and into the vast astonished silence I said, in the plain flat voice of a guard reporting what he saw, "Your Majesty, before you sign, there is a security matter the captain of the guard requires this hall to hear." The silence broke into 100 murmurs. A guard speaking in the great hall, the thing was unheard of, the thing did not happen, and the court did not know whether to be scandalized or afraid. The Earl of Brennick was on his feet, his smoothness gone, demanding to know the meaning of this, ordering the sergeant removed. And Lady Verena Thorne lifted her head and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 6 years, the way she looked at people, searching for the want in them, the lever, the thread, and I watched her fail to find one. And I watched the first true fear of her life come into her eyes, because a woman who understands everyone through what they want had just been confronted by a man who wanted nothing, doing the one thing she had been certain he could never do, and she did not, in that instant, know why. Then Colonel Holly's Garin stepped out from the side door, in his full decorations, the captain of the Queen's bodyguard, an authority no controller's writ could touch, and the Earl's voice died in his throat. "The sergeant speaks on my order and under my authority," said Garin, and his voice filled the hall like a drum, "and this hall will hear him by the right of the bodyguard which answers to the crown alone. Sergeant Crale, report, plain, what did you find and where and when?" And so, standing in the center of the great hall of Harrogate, with the document of abdication lying unsigned beneath the high seat and the pen beside it untouched, I gave my report. I gave it plain, as Garin had ordered, as a guard reporting what he saw, with no grievance and no flourish, and that plainness was the deadliest thing in the world, because there is nothing for an advocate to twist in a man who simply states what he found. 12 days ago, on my night watch, I found the lock of the muniment cabinet that holds the civil list ledgers had been scratched by a key that did not quite fit, I said. A second key, cut to match and not perfectly. I said nothing and I watched. The hall had gone silent again, the held, leaning silence of people who have realized the ground is moving. I read the post books of the night watch, the guard's own books, kept these 200 years, which record every soul who passes an inner door after the household has retired. I read 3 years of them, and on every single night on which one of these documents was supposedly authorized, every date in the folder the Lord Treasurer laid before this hall, the postbooks show that one person, and not Her Majesty, passed alone through the muniment door in the dead small hours, when Her Majesty was asleep behind a door I or one of my men was guarding. The same person, every night, the controller of the household. The murmur that ran through the court was a different sound now. Lady Thorne's face had not moved, but her hands had. I saw them tighten on the green folder, the smallest thing, the second flicker in 6 years. That by itself proves only late hours, I said, so I went on. 3 nights ago I found a third door, a sealed suite in the West Range, the late secretary's apartments, locked from within by a new lock, fitted in secret on a sealed door where no lock should turn against the household. This morning, before the court gathered, I requested the captain of the guard inspect that irregularity with me, as is my duty and his right. He came. He saw the new lock. With my own master key, logged from the guard's armory and marked by me 2 nights ago so that the lock could be proven untouched, I opened that door before him, and the captain of the guard entered that room and read, with his own eyes, what is in it. I let the silence hold 1 beat, then I gave them the wall. In that room, on the writing table, in a leather portfolio, are the drafts, I said. Sheets of practice signatures, Her Majesty's name traced and traced again, a dozen attempts down a single page, the word authorized, learned letter by letter. They are not Her Majesty's hand. They are the work of a hand learning to counterfeit Her Majesty's hand, and they are in the Comptroller's own handwriting, the same hand that keeps the household books. In that room are letters, drafts, never sent to the Earl of Brenwick, speaking of our arrangement, and the Regency as discussed, and his lands restored, with interest the moment the matter is concluded. A letter to the Lord Treasurer reminding him, gently, of certain shortfalls in his own accounts that need never trouble anyone, provided he did his duty, when the time came. And in that room is a single sheet, in the Comptroller's hand, that records the true destination of every coin diverted from the civil list, not to any foreign crown, but to accounts the Comptroller herself controls, behind false names, the very monies she has dressed up to look like Her Majesty's treason. I turned then, and I looked at Lady Verena Thorne, and I finished it. Every crime laid at the Queen's door this morning was committed by the hand of the woman who laid it there. The ledgers are real. The signatures upon them are forged. The accounts abroad are real, and they are hers. She did not find a treason. She built one, out of true bricks, and she carried every one of them through that muniment door in the dead of night with a key she cut herself, and the guard wrote down every journey, because the guard, my lady, watches the doors. The hall erupted. I will not try to set down the whole of it. The shouting and the rising and the heralds frozen with their cased proclamations, and the Earl of Brenwick on the color of ash, and Sir Marston Vale, half collapsed in his chair with his hands over his face. I will set down only the center of it, the thing I had built 12 days to see, which was Lady Verena Thorne. She did not break all at once. The cleverest person I have ever met does not break all at once. For a long moment she stood absolutely still at the foot of the table, and I watched her mind do the only thing it knew how to do, which was to search for the lever, the thread to pull that would turn this, and find, for the first time in her life, nothing. The post-books were the guard's and could not be turned. The witness was the captain of the guard, who owed her nothing and feared her nothing. The room was sealed and marked and witnessed, and could not be denied. And the man who had laid it all bare wanted nothing, had never wanted anything, could not be bought or bent or frightened or explained away. There was no thread. For the first time in 6 years in her life, perhaps, there was no thread to pull. And so she did the last thing left to a clever person at the bottom of the sum, which was to reach for the roll itself. "This is a fabrication," she said, and her voice was still beautiful, still steady, the discipline of her a match for mine to the very end. "A desperate fiction, got up by a servant and an old soldier to save a guilty queen. I have served this house faithfully for—" "Colonel Garin," said Queen Saralind. She had risen from the high seat. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She rose, and she stepped down to stand beside the unsigned document and the untouched pen, and she looked down the length of the hall at the woman who had spent 6 years and a forged treason to take her crown, and the calm I had asked her to wear in the morning had become something else now, something the whole court could feel, the steel under the goodness, made plain at last. "Colonel Garin," she said again, "the suite in the West Range. Is it sealed, witnessed, and undisturbed, as the sergeant has reported?" "It is, Your Majesty," said Garin. "On my honor and on the watch of 2 of my own men, posted since this morning. Every word the sergeant has spoken, I will swear to. I read the papers myself." "Then let it be opened," said the Queen. "Now before this hall, before the court and the heralds and our honored guest from the Marchlands, let the portfolio be brought here, under guard and laid open on this table beside the instrument I was asked to sign, and let the realm compare the 2 hands. Let everything be seen." She turned to Count Havard. "My Lord Count, you were brought here to witness an abdication. I ask you instead to witness the truth, and to carry it home to your master plain, so that no whisper of treason between our crowns survives this morning. Will you witness?" And Count Havard of the Marchlands, courteous and exact, who had watched the room all morning as a professional watches a room, bowed deeply and said, "It would be the honor of my embassy, Your Majesty." And I understood that Lady Thorne's last hope, that the foreign witness might cloud the matter into a quarrel between crowns, had just closed, because the foreign witness was an honest man and had been used by her as surely as the treasurer and the earl. And he knew it now, and he would carry the truth home. The portfolio was sent for, under Garin's men. And while the hall waited, in the strange suspended hush of a court that has watched its whole morning turn inside out, the small thing happened that I will keep, of all of it, the longest. Princess Malin got down off her little chair. No one stopped her. No one was watching her. The whole hall was watching the high seat and the door through which the portfolio would come. And the small, fierce girl who collected beetles in matchboxes walked across the open floor of the great hall of Harrogate, past the council table, past the ash-gray earl, and she came to me where I stood at attention in the center of the hall, and she took hold of my white glove with her small hand, and she stood beside the sergeant of the watch and faced the room with her chin up, exactly as her mother had taught her, declaring without a word whose side she was on, and which of the grown men in that hall she trusted. And her brother Joran, after a moment, got down too, and came and stood at my other side, grave and steady, no longer a boy trying to be a man, just a boy who had decided where he belonged. I did not move. A guard does not move on duty, not even then, not even with a princess's hand in his glove and a prince at his shoulder and his eyes burning. But I will tell you that Queen Saralind looked at her 2 children standing beside her guard in the center of that hall, and that the calm steel on her face broke, just once, just for a moment, into something no crown ever taught her, and then she mastered it because she was the queen and the portfolio was coming through the door. It was laid open on the council table beside the unsigned instrument of regency, and the 2 were compared in front of them all. There was no need for the comparison to take long. The practiced signatures, sheet after sheet of the Queen's name learned letter by letter, the letters to the Earl and the Treasurer in the Comptroller's own unmistakable hand, the keystone sheet with its cold, neat columns naming the true accounts. The Earl of Brennick made the comparison himself, because the Queen quietly commanded him to, and his face as he read his own incriminating words in Lady Thorne's draft was the face of a man watching the floor of his life give way. He did not bluster long. There is no blustering against a thing you wrote yourself, set beside the proof in another's hand. He confessed his part in a low, broken voice, the lands, the arrangement, the regency promised. And in confessing his own part, he confirmed every word I had spoken. And Sir Marston Vale, weeping openly now, confessed the shortfalls she had held over him, the threat dressed as a duty. And so the two men she had caught and used became, at the last, the two witnesses who sealed her ruin, which I think she would have appreciated the irony of, if she had been able to appreciate anything at all by then. She did not confess. To the very end, Lady Verena Thorne did not confess, and I have come to believe she could not, because to confess she would have had to want something, mercy or relief, or an end to the standing up. And she was a person who had spent her whole life wanting only the one thing, the power that had fallen onto the wrong head, and that thing was gone now beyond recall. And with it, I think, went whatever had stood where another person keeps their soul. She simply stood at the foot of the table where she had sat as if to forget there was a head, and she watched her 6-year sum come apart brick by true brick, and her perfect face held its sorrowing composure to the last, which was, in its terrible way, the most disciplined thing I ever saw a guilty person do. Queen Saralind did not raise her voice once. She did not need to. She let the proof do all the speaking, the way I had let the room make the witness, and I understood that she and I had reached from opposite ends of the palace the same hard wisdom, that the truth, laid bare in the open before people who cannot be bought, needs no help from anger to bring the powerful down. Power is not the shout. Power is the restraint that lets the truth be heard. When it was finished, the Queen spoke her judgment, and she spoke it plainly. Lady Verena Thorne was stripped of her office of Comptroller of the household and of every key, charge, and trust she had held, then and forever. She was barred from the court of Eldermoor and from every royal house and holding within it, never again to set foot where the crown sat. Her stolen moneys were traced through the false accounts named on her own keystone sheet and returned, every coin, to the civil list she had robbed. She was given over to the proper law of the realm to answer for the forgery and the theft, under guard in the open, by the same public process she had meant to use to destroy a queen. And the Queen, in the one mercy she granted, ordered that it be done without cruelty and without spectacle, because, she said, the house of Harrogate did not need to be cruel to be just, and the difference between herself and the woman at the foot of the table had always been exactly that. And she would not lose it now in the hour of her vindication. The Earl of Brennock and Sir Marston Vale were stripped of their offices and their seats on the council, and dealt with by the law as well, though the Queen marked, for the record and for the law's attention, that both had confessed, and that one had been caught and held by his own crimes before he was used. Justice, she said, should know the difference between the architect and the bricks. Count Havard of the Marchlands bowed to the Queen before the whole court, and pledged to carry home to his master the plain truth of the morning, that there had been no treason between the crowns, only a thief who had tried to make it look like one, so that the lie died there in the hall and never poisoned a boarder. And then it was over, and the heralds who had come to carry an abdication to the realm carried instead, by the Queen's command, the truth, that a plot against the crown had been uncovered and broken, that the Queen sat secure and vindicated, and that the realm was safe. By nightfall it was known in every corner of Eldermoor, and the kingdom that had gone about its day believing the people set above them were exactly what they appeared to be learned that, this once, the appearance and the truth had come apart, and that the watch had been keeping after all. As for me, I went back to my post. I want to end there because that is where it truly ends, and because if you have understood anything of what I have told you, you will understand why. The Queen sent for me that evening in her private apartments, and she thanked me, and she offered me, in the warmth of her gratitude, every reward a grateful sovereign can offer a man: rank, lands, a place at court, a name among the great of the realm. And I asked her with respect to let me keep the one thing I had. "And what is that, Sergeant Crale?" she said. "My post, Your Majesty," I said. "I have stood at your door for 19 years and never wanted anything, and that is the whole of what made me of any use to you this week. The day I take a reward is the day I become a man who can be given things, and a man who can be given things is a man who can, in time, be bought. I would rather stay the man at the door who wants nothing. It is a better guard for you than any lord I could be made into." The Queen of Eldermoor looked at me for a long moment, and then she did a thing I will keep until I die. She inclined her head to me, the small grave nod she gave me every time she passed my post, the one that had cost her nothing for 19 years and that I would have died for, and she said, "Then keep your post, Sergeant Crale, and keep your nothing, and know that your queen knows the worth of it, even if she may never say so again where it could spoil you." And that was my reward, and it was the only one I ever wanted, and it was enough. The stag beetle named Crale came round by midday, as I had said he would. The cold had only made him slow, not finished him, and Princess Malin reported it to me at my post the next morning with enormous satisfaction, as though we had between us saved 2 lives that week and not one, and I suppose, in a way, that we had. She still keeps him on her windowsill. Prince Joran no longer practices being a man. He asks me, instead, careful questions about duty, and I answer them as plainly as I can, because I think he will be a good king one day, and good kings are made of plain, true answers given early. And I stand at the door. That is all, that is the whole of it. The cleverest person I ever met spent 6 years building a perfect machine to steal a kingdom, out of true bricks and forged signatures and the soft kindnesses that were really keys, and she failed for one reason and one reason only. She understood every soul in the palace through what they wanted, and she never once thought to fear the one man who wanted nothing, standing furniture. Still at the door she had filed away as not worth a glance. She watched the smiles. I watched the doors. And in the end the doors told me everything, because they always do if you are patient enough to listen. And I am a careful man, and I had the time. I have it still. The queen is secure and the children are safe, and the realm is whole and the watch is kept. And if you ever pass the great gates of Harrowgate and see a sergeant of the inner watch standing motionless in his red tunic with his eyes forward and his face like stone, and you think, as everyone always thinks, that there is nothing behind that stillness but discipline, you may be right. But you may be wrong. He may be a careful man, watching a door, paying for one moment with all the others, waiting for the day that something needs to be true out loud. I hope, for your kingdom's sake, that he is.